The distant gunshot echoed across the vast plains as Asher Kane rode toward St. Louis, Missouri, his eyes as hard as the sun-baked earth beneath his stallion's hooves. It was 1876, a time when men were measured by their courage, their word, and sometimes the speed of their draw, but never by the warmth of their smile, which was fortunate for Asher because he had forgotten how to form one over a decade ago. Dust swirled around him as he approached the town, the setting sun casting long shadows across the wooden buildings and dirt streets. His reputation preceded him, a gunslinger turned cattle driver who'd never been seen to crack so much as a grin. Some said it was because he'd killed so many men that his face had frozen in perpetual solemnity. Others whispered that he'd made a deal with the devil, trading his ability to smile for deadly accuracy with a pistol. The truth, however, was buried with his family in a small cemetery outside of Kansas City, along with any joy he once possessed. Asher dismounted outside the town's saloon, tying his dappled gray stallion to the hitching post. His spurs jangled against the wooden boardwalk as he pushed through the swinging doors. Conversation dimmed as heads turned toward the newcomer, tall and lean with eyes the color of storm clouds. His dark hair, slightly too long, curled beneath his wide-brimmed hat, and a week's worth of stubble shadowed his jawline. The most distinctive feature, however, was the flat line of his mouth that never curved upward. "Whiskey," he said to the barkeep, his voice rough from days of riding with little conversation. He laid a coin on the counter and took the glass, downing it in one swift motion. "You Kane?" the barkeep asked, already reaching for the bottle to pour another. Asher nodded once. "Heard you're looking for work. Peterson's outfit is taking cattle north in a few days. He's been asking about experienced hands." Another nod, another drink. Asher didn't engage in unnecessary conversation. Words like smiles seemed pointless in a world that had taken everything from him. The saloon doors swung open again, and a collective intake of breath drew his attention. A woman stepped inside, looking entirely out of place in the establishment frequented by cowboys and drifters. She wore a simple blue dress with a bonnet that framed delicate features. Her eyes, warm and determined, scanned the room before landing on the barkeep. "Mr. Roberts," she said, approaching the bar without acknowledging the stares. "I've come for that package from St. Louis you mentioned." Asher shifted slightly, making space for her at the counter, though his expression remained unchanged. Their eyes met briefly, and something unfamiliar stirred within him, a sensation he hadn't felt in years. "Miss Elliot," the barkeep responded with a nod. "Came in this morning. Bridget, isn't it?" "Brielle," she corrected gently. "Brielle Elliot." The barkeep disappeared into a back room and returned with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Your books, as requested, all the way from that fancy bookshop in St. Louis." "Thank you," she smiled, and the simple gesture seemed to brighten the dim saloon. Asher found himself staring, not at her beauty, which was considerable, but at how easily that smile came to her lips. As she turned to leave, a drunk cowboy stepped into her path. "What's a pretty lady like yourself doing buying books?" he slurred. "Don't you know reading gives women dangerous ideas?" Brielle clutched her package tighter. "Excuse me," she said firmly, attempting to step around him. The man grabbed her arm. "Why don't you stay for a drink instead?" Before Asher fully realized what he was doing, he was standing beside them, his hand clamped around the drunk's wrist with enough pressure to make the man wince. The lady said, "Excuse me." Asher's voice was quiet but ice cold. "Mind your own business, Kane," the drunk spat, but his bravado was undermined by the fear in his eyes. "Let go of her arm and I'll consider it." The drunk released Brielle immediately. Asher let go of his wrist and stepped back, his hand hovering near his holster. The message was clear. The man stumbled away, cursing under his breath. Brielle looked up at Asher, her green eyes wide with surprise and gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Kane," he nodded once, his expression unchanged. "Madam, you're new to town," she observed, passing through. "Well, I'm grateful for your intervention." She hesitated. "I should be going. I teach at the schoolhouse and I have lessons to prepare." Asher nodded again, watching as she left the saloon, her blue dress swaying gently with each step. Something about her lingered in his mind, perhaps the way she carried herself with quiet dignity, or how her smile seemed genuine in a world full of falsehoods. "You best be careful around that one," the barkeep said, interrupting Asher's thoughts. "Why's that?" Miss Elliot's got ideas. "Came out west 2 years ago to teach, but she does more than reading and arithmetic. Talks about women voting, Indians having rights, stuff that don't sit well with some folks around here." Asher's face remained impassive, but he found himself intrigued by this woman who wasn't afraid to stand for what she believed in. "Where can I find Peterson?" he asked, changing the subject. "His ranch is 3 miles east of town. Can't miss it." With a final nod, Asher left the saloon and untied his horse. He mounted and headed east, but his thoughts remained fixed on a pair of green eyes and a smile that somehow made the air feel less heavy in his lungs. The Peterson Ranch was indeed unmissable, a sprawling property with a large main house, several outbuildings, and fenced corrals containing hundreds of cattle. As Asher rode up the dusty drive, a man in his 50s with a salt and pepper beard emerged from the barn. "Help you, stranger." The man called out, looking for Peterson, heard he needs hands for a cattle drive. The older man sized him up with a practiced eye. "You're looking at him. Robert Peterson. You have experience." 5 years with the Hart outfit in Texas, 2 with Callaway in Kansas. Peterson nodded appreciatively. "Good outfits. Why'd you leave?" "Time to move on." It was all Asher ever said about his past. "Well, I need men who can handle themselves and the cattle. Drive starts in 3 days, taking 2,000 head to Wyoming. Pay is fair, $40 for the month, plus room and board while you're here." "I'll take it," Asher said without hesitation. "Good." Peterson extended his hand. "And your name?" "Asher Kane." Recognition flickered in Peterson's eyes. "Heard that name before." "You're the one they call Stone Face, ain't you?" Asher didn't confirm or deny it. "Well, I don't care about a man's reputation so long as he works hard and follows orders. Bunkhouse is over there. Find yourself a bed. We start at dawn tomorrow. Got to get these cattle ready for the drive." With a tip of his hat, Asher led his horse toward the bunkhouse. Inside, a dozen men lounged on bunks or played cards at a crude table. They looked up as he entered, curiosity and wariness in their expressions. "New hand," he said simply, claiming an empty bunk in the corner. A burly man with a thick mustache nodded at him. "I'm Hank, ranch foreman. These boys'll introduce themselves. Supper's at sundown in the cookhouse." Asher unsaddled his horse, tended to it in the corral, and organized his few possessions before joining the men for the evening meal. He spoke little, answering direct questions with minimal words. No one seemed bothered by his reticence. Cowboys weren't known for being talkative, and many had reasons to keep to themselves. For the next 2 days, Asher worked alongside the other hands, rounding up stray cattle, checking for illness or injury, and preparing the herd for the long journey north. The work was hard but familiar, requiring skill rather than conversation. He quickly earned respect for his abilities with both horses and cattle. On the evening before the drive was to begin, Peterson invited all the hands to the main house for a substantial meal. "Last good food you'll have for a while," he explained. "My wife insists on sending you off proper." The ranch house was comfortable but not ostentatious, reflecting the practical nature of its owner. Mrs. Peterson, a round-faced woman with kind eyes, had prepared a feast that had the cowboys removing their hats reverently as they entered the dining room. Asher hung back, uncomfortable with the social setting, when a familiar voice caught his attention. "Mr. Kane, what a surprise!" He turned to find Brielle Elliot setting a basket of fresh bread on the table. Her hair was pulled back into a simple bun, a few honey-colored strands framing her face. "Miss Elliot," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "You two know each other?" Mrs. Peterson asked, looking between them. "We met briefly in town," Brielle explained. "Mr. Kane helped me with an uncomfortable situation." Brielle is my niece," Mrs. Peterson said proudly. "She's staying with us for a few days while the schoolhouse roof is being repaired." Asher found himself seated across from Brielle during the meal. While the other men talked loudly, sharing stories and jokes, he remained silent, occasionally glancing at her. She seemed equally content to observe rather than dominate the conversation, though when she did speak, everyone listened. "Miss Elliot," one of the younger cowboys asked, "is it true you're teaching the Indian children to read?" The table quieted, and Asher noticed several men shifting uncomfortably. Brielle met the question directly. "Yes, every child deserves an education, regardless of their background." "My pa says Indians can't be civilized," the young man persisted. "Your father is entitled to his opinion," she replied evenly. "But I've found that people, regardless of their heritage, respond to being treated with dignity. The children I teach are eager to learn." "Ain't you scared, going to the reservation by yourself?" Her eyes flashed. "I take reasonable precautions, but fear should never prevent one from doing what's right." Asher found himself admiring her conviction. In his experience, people rarely stood up for their beliefs when it was inconvenient or unpopular. After dinner, as the men filed back toward the bunkhouse, Asher lingered on the porch, looking up at the stars. The night was cool, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. "Beautiful night," Brielle said, stepping onto the porch beside him. She carried 2 cups of coffee, offering one to him. He accepted it with a nod of thanks. "You don't say much, Mr. Kane," she observed, leaning against the porch railing. "Not much worth saying." To his surprise, she laughed softly. "Now that's where we disagree. The world is full of things worth discussing: books, ideas, people, nature." She gestured to the vast sky above them. "Just look at those stars. Don't they make you wonder about our place in all this?" Asher took a sip of his coffee. "Can't say that they do." She studied him curiously. "What does make you wonder, then?" The question caught him off guard. No one had asked about his thoughts in years. They only cared about his skills with cattle or guns. "I wonder why some live while others die," he said finally, the words escaping before he could stop them. Brielle's expression softened. "That's quite a profound question, Mr. Kane. Not looking for philosophy, Miss Elliot, just an observation." "Sometimes observations are the start of philosophy." She smiled again, that genuine expression that seemed to reach her eyes. "Will you be gone long on this cattle drive?" "Month, maybe more." "Well, perhaps when you return you'll join us for Sunday dinner. My aunt would like that." Asher looked at her, trying to understand her interest in him. Why what? Why invite me? You don't know me." She considered this. "I know you helped me when you didn't have to. I know you work hard. My uncle mentioned it. And I know there's more to you than the silent cowboy everyone sees." She pushed away from the railing. "Sometimes a person just needs to be seen, Mr. Kane." With that, she bid him good night and returned inside, leaving Asher with his coffee and the unsettling feeling that she had somehow looked past his carefully constructed walls. Dawn broke clear and cold as the cowboys prepared to move the cattle. Asher was already mounted, his stallion prancing with anticipation as the herd began to move. He took his position on the left flank, keeping the cattle bunched together and on course. From the ranch house porch, the Petersons waved goodbye. Brielle stood among them, her hand raised in farewell. Asher nodded in her direction, then turned his attention to the trail ahead, pushing thoughts of green eyes and challenging questions from his mind. He had a job to do, and personal entanglements had no place in his life. The first week of the cattle drive was uneventful but grueling. The herd moved slowly, covering only 10 to 12 miles a day. Asher's days blurred together up before dawn, in the saddle all day, taking his turn at night watch, snatching a few hours of sleep before starting again. The physical demands left little energy for thinking, which suited him fine. On the 8th day, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. Peterson rode along the line, calling out instructions. "Weather's coming in fast. We need to find a good spot to hold the herd." They located a sheltered valley with a small stream just as the first raindrops fell. By nightfall, the storm had intensified, with lightning cracking across the sky and thunder rolling continuously. The cattle grew restless, shifting and lowing nervously. "Double watch tonight," Peterson ordered. "These conditions are prime for a stampede." Asher took first watch with 3 other men, riding slowly around the perimeter of the herd, singing low to keep the cattle calm. The rain soaked through his slicker, running down his neck and back. Lightning illuminated the scene in brief, brilliant flashes, revealing thousands of wet, huddled bovine forms. It happened just after midnight. A lightning bolt struck a tree at the edge of the valley with a deafening crack. The terrified bellow of a steer was followed immediately by the thunder of hooves as the entire herd surged to its feet. "Stampede!" The cry went up as cowboys scrambled for their horses. Asher was already mounted, racing alongside the leading edge of the herd. In the darkness and rain, he could barely see, relying on instinct and the occasional lightning flash to navigate. The plan was simple but dangerous: get to the front of the stampede and gradually turn the leaders, causing the herd to run in a circle until they tired themselves out. He pushed his horse harder, the animal responding valiantly despite the treacherous conditions. They gained ground, drawing even with the leaders of the herd. Asher began the delicate process of directing them, not trying to stop them, an impossible task, but guiding their panic into a controlled movement. A shout from his right drew his attention. One of the younger cowboys had gotten too close to the herd and was being pushed dangerously close to a ravine. Without hesitation, Asher changed direction, driving his horse between the cattle and the endangered rider. "Pull back," he shouted over the thunder of hooves. The young cowboy Billy, he remembered, looked terrified, his horse slipping in the mud as he tried to regain control. Asher reached out, grabbing the reins of Billy's horse and pulling both of them away from the edge. A steer veered suddenly, its horn catching Asher's leg. Pain flared as the point tore through his trousers and into his flesh. His horse stumbled, nearly going down, but recovered with the instinctive surefootedness of a well-trained mount. Gradually, other cowboys joined them, and together they managed to turn the herd. After an hour of controlled chaos, the cattle finally began to slow, their panic exhausted. By dawn they had settled, though many had scattered and would need to be rounded up. Peterson took stock of the damage as morning light revealed the aftermath. 3 men injured, 20 or so cattle lost over the ravine, and dozens scattered. His eyes fell on Asher, who was binding his leg with a strip of cloth. "You saved Billy's life," Asher shrugged. "Did what needed doing. That cut looks deep. You should ride back to town, get it looked at proper." "I'll manage." Peterson shook his head. "It's not a request, Kane. That gets infected out here, you could lose the leg. Town's only a day's ride back the way we came. Get it stitched, then catch up to us. We'll be moving slower for a few days anyway, rounding up strays." Recognizing the order for what it was, Asher nodded reluctantly. After gathering his gear, he mounted his horse, wincing as his injured leg protested. "Thank you," Billy said, approaching him. "I'd be dead if not for you." Asher nodded once, uncomfortable with gratitude. "Be more careful next time." With that, he turned his horse and began the journey back to town, the pain in his leg growing with each mile. By the time he reached St. Louis, fever had set in. The town's doctor, an older man named Hamilton, examined the wound with a frown. "Infection's taking hold," he announced. "I'll clean it and stitch it, but you'll need rest and care for several days." He looked at Asher's pale, sweat-beaded face. "You got somewhere to stay?" Asher shook his head. "Hotel's full with some railroad men in town. We've got a small room here you can use." The doctor began cleaning the wound, causing Asher to grip the edge of the table tightly, though his face remained stoic. "You're a tough one, aren't you? Most men would be hollering by now." Asher said nothing, focusing on a point on the wall as the doctor worked. When the wound was finally cleaned and stitched, exhaustion and fever overwhelmed him. He barely registered being helped to a small cot in a back room before consciousness slipped away. He drifted in and out of awareness for what seemed like days, plagued by feverish dreams. In his delirium, he was back at his family's farm, watching helplessly as raiders torched the buildings and cut down his parents and sister. Their screams merged with the sound of gunfire until he couldn't tell which was which. A cool hand on his forehead broke through the nightmare. "Easy," a gentle voice soothed. "You're safe." Asher's eyes fluttered open to find Brielle Elliot sitting beside his cot, a damp cloth in her hand. Confusion clouded his mind. "Miss Elliot, Dr. Hamilton asked me to look in on you while he attends to other patients," she explained, wringing out the cloth in a basin of water before placing it back on his forehead. "Your fever's been quite high." He tried to sit up, but weakness and pain forced him back down. "How long?" 2 days. "The infection was severe, but the doctor believes you're past the worst of it now." She offered him a cup of water, supporting his head as he drank. "What happened?" "Stampede. Steer caught my leg." She nodded, setting the cup aside. "Billy returned yesterday, told everyone how you saved him. It was quite the heroic tale." "Not heroic, just doing my job." He closed his eyes briefly, fighting another wave of dizziness. "You should rest more," she said, adjusting his blanket. "I'll come back later with some broth." As she rose to leave, Asher caught her wrist, surprising both of them with the gesture. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough. Brielle's smile was gentle. "You're welcome, Mr. Kane." Over the next 3 days, Asher gradually regained his strength. Brielle visited regularly, bringing food, fresh water, and, unexpectedly, conversation that he found himself reluctantly enjoying. She read to him from one of her book's tales of adventure and distant lands that made the small room seem less confining. "You have quite a collection of books," he commented on the 3rd day, sitting up in bed while she changed his bandage. "My father was a professor before he passed," she explained. "He believed education was the greatest gift one could give. When I decided to come west to teach, his books were the only possession I couldn't bear to leave behind." "Why did you come west? Seems there'd be more opportunities for a teacher back east." Her hand stilled momentarily. "After my parents died of influenza, there was little keeping me in Boston. And I still believe that education is needed most in places where it's least available." She secured the fresh bandage and sat back. "What about you, Mr. Kane? What brought you to this life? Asher's expression closed off. Nothing worth talking about. Rather than being deterred, she studied him with those perceptive green eyes. You know, not smiling doesn't hide your pain. It just keeps the joy from balancing it. Her words struck uncomfortably close to something buried deep within him. Not everyone needs to share their life story, Miss Elliot. No, she agreed, gathering her supplies. But sometimes sharing the burden makes it lighter. Before he could respond, Dr. Hamilton entered. Good news, Kane. That leg's healing clean. Another day of rest and you should be fit to travel. Relief and, strangely, disappointment mingled in Asher's chest. Thank you, doctor, and you, Miss Elliot, she nodded, her smile slightly sad. Rest well, Mr. Kane, I'll see you tomorrow. That night, Asher lay awake, his thoughts churning. The cattle drive would be well ahead by now, but Peterson had said they'd be moving slowly. If he left tomorrow, riding hard, he could catch up within a few days. It was the sensible plan: finish the job he'd been hired for, collect his pay, then move on as he always did. Yet something held him back, something with honey-colored hair and challenging questions. In the short time he'd known Brielle, she had somehow penetrated the wall he'd built around himself. She saw past his silence to the man beneath, and instead of being repelled, she seemed drawn to him. The realization was unsettling. Asher had spent years avoiding connections, knowing that attachment only led to loss. But for the first time since burying his family, he found himself considering another path. Morning came with no resolution to his internal conflict. Brielle arrived as promised, carrying a clean shirt and his mended trousers. Mrs. Peterson sent these when she heard you were recovering, she explained, setting them on the bed. She thought you might need them. Kind of her, Asher said, sitting up carefully. His leg still ached, but the sharp pain had subsided to a dull throb. Brielle hesitated, then sat in the chair beside his cot. Will you be leaving today to rejoin the drive? He studied her face, searching for the meaning behind her question. That was the plan. I see. She looked down at her hands. Well, I wish you safe travels, Mr. Kane. Asher, he said suddenly. My name is Asher. A smile touched her lips. Asher, then, and I'm Brielle, not Miss Elliot. An awkward silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken words. Finally, Asher cleared his throat. Thank you for your care these past days. It was my pleasure. She stood, smoothing her skirt. I should let you prepare for your journey. As she turned to leave, Asher made a decision that would alter the course of his life. Brielle, he called after her. What if I didn't go? She paused, turning back with surprise evident in her expression. What do you mean? What if I stayed in town, found work here? Hope flickered in her eyes. Is that what you want? For the first time in years, Asher allowed himself to consider what he truly wanted, beyond mere survival. I'm not sure what I want, he admitted, but I'd like to find out. Her smile was like sunrise after a long night. Well, I happen to know that the livery stable is looking for someone who knows horses, and Mrs. Peterson mentioned that her husband could use a permanent hand at the ranch come fall. Would it bother you, having me around? Brielle's cheeks colored slightly. On the contrary, I'd welcome it. She moved closer, her expression earnest. There's something about you, Asher Kane, something worth knowing better. For a moment he almost smiled. The muscles in his face twitched with the unfamiliar effort, but years of disuse prevailed. Still, something in his eyes softened. I reckon I could give it a try, for a while. I'm glad, she said simply, and in those two words Asher heard a promise of possibilities he'd long since stopped believing in. Later that day, with his few possessions packed and his horse saddled, Asher made his way to the livery stable. The owner, a grizzled man named Silas Jenkins, looked him up and down skeptically. Peterson sent word about you, Jenkins said. Says you know horses better than most. I get by, Asher replied. Well, I need someone who does more than get by. I've got 20 horses that need regular care, plus shoeing, breaking new stock, and repairs around the place. Jenkins crossed his arms. Pays $30 a month with a room above the stable. Sundays off unless there's an emergency. Asher nodded. I'll take it. Just like that. No haggling over terms. Terms are fair. Work sounds right for me. Jenkins extended a calloused hand. Welcome aboard, then. You can start tomorrow if that leg's up to it. With his immediate future secured, Asher sent a message to Peterson explaining his decision to remain in town. He settled into the small but clean room above the livery, arranging his sparse belongings and tending to his horse before heading to the general store for supplies. As he walked down the main street, he was acutely aware of the curious glances from townspeople. His reputation had clearly preceded him, and newcomers were always subject to scrutiny in small communities. He kept his head down, focusing on his errands rather than the whispers that followed him. At the general store, he found Brielle selecting fabric. She looked up as the bell above the door announced his arrival, her face brightening. Asher, how did it go with Mr. Jenkins? Got the job, he said, nodding to the shopkeeper as he gathered the items he needed. That's wonderful news. He's a fair employer if a bit rough around the edges. Asher paid for his purchases, then hesitated. Would you allow me to walk you home, as thanks for your help? Her smile was answer enough. They left the store together, walking side by side down the dusty street. Asher was conscious of the stares they attracted. The stone-faced cowboy and the schoolteacher made an unlikely pair. People are watching, he observed quietly. Brielle glanced around, then shrugged. People always watch what they don't understand. It doesn't bother me. And what is it they don't understand? Why I would choose to spend time with the mysterious Mr. Kane, I suppose. She looked up at him, her expression teasing. You do have quite the reputation, you know. All of it exaggerated, I'm sure, he said dryly. To his surprise, she laughed. There, that was almost humor. You're full of surprises, Asher. They reached the small house where she boarded with an elderly couple. On the porch, she turned to face him. Would you like to join me for dinner on Sunday? Nothing formal, just a meal between friends. The word friends hung between them, carrying the weight of possibility. Asher nodded. I'd like that. Good. 4 o'clock then. She hesitated, then impulsively touched his arm. I'm glad you decided to stay, Asher. As he walked back to the livery, Asher found himself contemplating the strange turn his life had taken. A week ago, he had been a drifter, moving from job to job without attachment or purpose. Now, he had employment, a place to stay, and most disconcerting of all, someone who seemed genuinely interested in knowing him. The next weeks fell into a pattern. Asher worked from dawn until dusk at the livery, quickly proving his worth to Jenkins. The older man grudgingly admitted that Asher had a way with the beasts that he hadn't seen in years. Word spread, and soon ranchers from surrounding areas were bringing their horses specifically to have Asher work with them. On Sundays, he joined Brielle for dinner, sometimes at her boarding house, occasionally at the Petersons' ranch when they came to town. Their friendship deepened through conversations that gradually drew Asher out of his shell. He found himself sharing small details of his life, his childhood in Kentucky, his love of horses, his dreams of having his own ranch someday. She, in turn, told him of her life in Boston, her passion for teaching, and her belief that education could bridge the divides between people. One Sunday in late August, they sat on the bank of the creek outside town, a picnic spread between them. The day was warm, the sky a brilliant blue dotted with white clouds. Brielle had been reading aloud from a book of poetry, but now she set it aside, watching Asher as he skipped stones across the water. "You're different today," she observed. He glanced at her. "How so?" "More relaxed. Almost. Content." Asher considered this. "Maybe I am." He selected another stone, feeling its smooth weight in his palm. "It's been a long time since I stayed in one place long enough to feel settled." "Why did you move around so much?" The familiar tension returned to his shoulders. "Habit, I suppose." Brielle studied him, her green eyes penetrating. "No, it was more than that." She moved closer, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "Asher, I've never asked about your past because I sensed it was painful, but I care about you, and sometimes sharing pain is the first step toward healing." The stone fell from his fingers as he met her gaze. In her eyes, he saw something he hadn't encountered in years: genuine concern without pity, strength without judgment. Before he could reconsider, words began spilling out. "I had a family once. Parents, younger sister. We had a small farm in Kansas, nothing fancy, but it was ours." His voice was flat, as if reciting someone else's story. "During the war, raiders came through, Jayhawkers they called themselves, though they were just thugs using the conflict as an excuse to pillage. I was 15 out hunting when I came back." He swallowed hard. "The farm was burning. My father and mother were already dead. My sister," his voice broke. "They did things to her before they killed her. I found her body in the garden." Brielle's hand tightened on his arm, her eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Asher, I'm so sorry." "I buried them myself," he continued. "Then I tracked the raiders. Took me 2 years, but I found them one by one, made them pay." His eyes were distant, remembering. "After that, there didn't seem much point in settling anywhere. Nothing to smile about in a world that takes everything." Silence fell between them, broken only by the gentle sound of the creek. Finally, Brielle spoke, her voice soft but firm. "You've carried this alone for too long. It's my burden to carry." "No," she said with surprising intensity. "That's where you're wrong. Grief shared is grief diminished. Your family wouldn't want you to live half a life because of what happened to them." Asher looked away. "You didn't know them. I know enough about love to understand that it wants the best for those it touches." She moved to kneel before him, taking his hands in hers. "Asher, look at me." Reluctantly, he met her gaze. "You honored your family by surviving. You protected others from those men. Now honor your family by living fully, feeling joy, connection, hope." Her eyes held his, unwavering. "You deserve happiness, Asher Kane." Something cracked within him, a fissure in the wall he'd built around his heart. He didn't smile, couldn't yet, but he squeezed her hands gently. "Thank you for listening, for not judging. I would never judge you for protecting those you love or for your grief." She hesitated, then added softly, "or for finding me worth staying for." The air between them changed, charged with unspoken feelings. Asher reached out slowly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Brielle," a distant shout interrupted the moment. They turned to see a rider approaching rapidly from the direction of town. "Miss Elliot," the man called as he drew closer. "Doc Hamilton sent me to find you. There's been an accident at the mill, several men injured." Brielle was on her feet immediately. "I'll come right away." She turned to Asher. "I'm sorry I have to go. The doctor often needs assistance with multiple patients." "I understand," he said, gathering their picnic items quickly. "I'll take you back to town." They rode double on Asher's horse, reaching the doctor's office in minutes. Inside was controlled chaos: 4 men with various injuries from a collapsed scaffolding at the sawmill. Dr. Hamilton looked up with relief as Brielle entered. "Miss Elliot, thank goodness. Wilson's leg needs setting, and I've got to remove splinters from Taylor's back before infection sets in." Brielle immediately removed her shawl and rolled up her sleeves. "I'll see to Mr. Wilson." Asher stood uncertainly in the doorway until the doctor noticed him. "Kane, make yourself useful. Hold Taylor down while I work. This is going to hurt him something fierce." For the next several hours, Asher assisted as needed, holding patients still, fetching supplies, helping move men to cots once they were treated. He watched Brielle work alongside the doctor with competence and compassion, speaking soothingly to the injured men as she cleaned wounds and applied bandages. It was past midnight when the last patient was stabilized. Exhaustion etched lines in Dr. Hamilton's face as he washed blood from his hands. "Thank you both. Couldn't have managed without you." Brielle nodded tiredly. "Will you need me to stay?" "No, they're all stable now. Get some rest. You too, Kane." Outside, the night was cool and quiet, the town sleeping around them. Asher walked Brielle to her boarding house, neither speaking until they reached her door. "You were remarkable today," he said finally. She smiled wearily. "As were you. I didn't know you had medical experience. Just good at following directions." "Well, the doctor appreciated your help." "As did I." She looked up at him, her expression soft in the moonlight. "Asher, about our conversation earlier, it can wait," he interrupted gently. "You need rest." She nodded, then surprised him by rising on tiptoe to kiss his cheek. "Good night, Asher." He stood motionless, feeling the imprint of her lips long after she disappeared inside. The wall around his heart crumbled further, and for the first time in years, he didn't try to rebuild it. September brought cooler temperatures and preparations for winter. Asher continued his work at the livery, earning a reputation throughout the county as a skilled horse trainer. Jenkins, impressed with his work ethic and abilities, offered him a partnership in the business. "I'm getting too old to run this place alone," the older man explained. "You've got the touch with horses and the head for business. Think about it." Asher promised he would, though the idea of such permanence both attracted and terrified him. His relationship with Brielle deepened, their Sunday meetings extending to evening walks and occasional suppers at the small restaurant in town. They hadn't spoken of love, but it grew between them nonetheless, evident in the way his eyes followed her movements and how she softened at his approach. On a crisp October afternoon, Asher was working with a particularly difficult stallion when a commotion outside the livery caught his attention. Securing the horse, he stepped out to find a group of men gathered around the sheriff. "What's happening?" he asked Jenkins, who was watching from the doorway. "Indian trouble," the older man replied grimly. "Group of young braves hit the Wilson place last night, stole horses, burned a barn." Asher frowned. Relations with the local tribes had been tense but peaceful for several years. "Anyone hurt?" "No, thankfully. But sheriff's organizing a posse to track them, recover the stolen property." The sheriff spotted Asher and approached. "Kane, I need men who can ride and shoot. You in?" Before Asher could respond, he caught sight of Brielle hurrying toward them, her face flushed with concern. She pushed through the crowd to reach the sheriff. "Sheriff Davis, please reconsider this posse," she implored. "This situation needs diplomacy, not force." The sheriff sighed, clearly having anticipated her intervention. "Miss Elliot, with all due respect, these Indians stole property and committed arson. That requires a response." "I know these people," she insisted. "The young men involved are from the families whose children I teach. Let me speak with Chief Running Elk. He'll ensure the horses are returned and the responsible parties held accountable according to tribal law. And if he doesn't, then you can form your posse. But please, give peace a chance first." The sheriff looked around at the gathered men, many of whom were shifting impatiently. "The men here want action, Miss Elliot. They want justice," she corrected. "And justice doesn't always come from the barrel of a gun." Asher stepped forward. "I'll go with her," he said, surprising himself as much as everyone else. to ensure her safety while she speaks with the chief. Brielle looked at him with gratitude and surprise. The sheriff considered the proposal, clearly torn between his duty to respond to the crime and his respect for Brielle's work with the tribe. "One day," he decided finally. "You have one day, Miss Elliot. If the horses aren't returned by tomorrow's sundown, we ride out." Brielle nodded solemnly. "Thank you, Sheriff. We'll leave immediately." As the crowd dispersed, some muttering disapproval, Asher turned to Brielle. "Are you sure about this?" "Yes," she said firmly. "There's more to this situation than a simple theft. The Wilson property borders land the tribe considers sacred. There's been tension for months." "I'll get the horses ready," he said, accepting her conviction. "Meet me here in 30 minutes. While preparing for the journey, Asher checked his revolver and tucked it into his holster. He had no intention of using it but wouldn't risk Brielle's safety by being unprepared. Jenkins watched him with concern. "You sure about this, Kane? Indians can be unpredictable." "So can white men," Asher replied evenly. "Brielle knows these people. I trust her judgment." The older man nodded slowly. "You care for her, don't you?" For once, Asher didn't evade the question. "Yes, thought as much. Well, see you bring her back safe." Brielle arrived promptly, having changed into a practical riding skirt and jacket. She carried a small bundle which she secured to her saddle. "Gifts," she explained, seeing his questioning look. "It's customary when visiting the chief." They rode out of town under the watchful eyes of concerned citizens. The reservation was located about 15 miles north, a journey that would take several hours. As they rode, Brielle explained more about the situation. "Chief Running Elk is a wise leader who wants peace with white settlers. But some of the younger men feel he's surrendered too much. They see their hunting grounds shrinking, their way of life disappearing. The Wilson farm sits on land where their ancestors are buried. That doesn't justify theft," Asher pointed out. "No, but it provides context. Understanding why someone acts as they do is the first step toward resolution." He considered this. "You're good at seeing all sides of a situation." She smiled slightly. "My father taught me that truth is rarely simple. People act from their own sense of justice and necessity. The trick is finding common ground." As they approached the reservation, Asher tensed, his hand hovering near his holster. Brielle noticed and shook her head. "We come in peace, Asher. They'll respect that." Two mounted braves appeared as they neared the encampment, watching their approach with expressionless faces. Brielle raised her hand in greeting and spoke a few words in their language. The braves exchanged glances. Then one nodded and turned his horse to lead them into the camp. The reservation was a collection of traditional teepees and newer wooden structures. Children stopped their play to watch the visitors, while women paused in their work, their expressions guarded. The brave led them to a large teepee at the center of the camp. "Wait here," he instructed, disappearing inside. Asher dismounted and helped Brielle down from her horse. "Are you nervous?" he asked quietly. "No," she replied. "These are my students' families. They know me." The teepee flap opened, and an older man emerged, tall and dignified, with gray streaks in his long black hair. He wore a mixture of traditional and Western clothing, and his eyes held the wisdom of years. "Miss Elliot," he greeted her in accented English. "You honor us with your visit." Brielle bowed her head respectfully. "Chief Running Elk, thank you for receiving us. This is my friend Asher Kane." The chief studied Asher with penetrating eyes. "The horse speaker, my people have seen your work in town." Asher nodded, surprised at being known. "Chief, please enter and share our fire." Inside the teepee, they sat on woven mats around a small fire. Brielle presented her gifts: tobacco, coffee, and a book of poetry. The chief accepted them with dignity, then waited in silence for her to state her purpose. "I've come about the incident at the Wilson farm," she began directly. "The sheriff is forming a posse. I asked for one day to seek a peaceful resolution." The chief's face remained impassive. "The young men acted without council approval. They believe Wilson has desecrated sacred ground." "I understand their feelings," Brielle said, "but their actions threaten the peace between our peoples. If the horses are returned and reparations made for the barn, perhaps Wilson could be persuaded to discuss the boundary issue." For over an hour they talked, the chief listening carefully to Brielle's suggestions while explaining his people's grievances. Asher contributed little to the conversation, impressed by Brielle's respectful yet firm diplomacy. Finally, the chief nodded. "I will speak with the young men. The horses will be returned by noon tomorrow, and we will provide labor to rebuild what was destroyed." "And Wilson," Asher asked, speaking for the first time, "will he respect the sacred sites?" The chief looked at him with renewed interest. "That is not in my power to promise. But Miss Elliot has suggested marking the burial grounds clearly, so there can be no claim of ignorance." "Thank you, Chief," Brielle said, relief evident in her voice. "This wisdom will prevent bloodshed." They were invited to share a meal before departing. As they ate, Asher observed the interaction between Brielle and the tribe members. She knew many by name, asking after children, offering praise for work or crafts. Her genuine respect was evident, and it was clearly reciprocated. After the meal, the chief walked them to their horses. "You have a rare spirit, Miss Elliot," he said. "You see with both eyes, not just one." He turned to Asher. "And you, horse speaker, you are a warrior who has seen much death." Asher met his gaze steadily. "Yes. Yet you choose to stand for peace today. That takes greater courage than drawing a weapon." The chief looked between them. "You two walk the same path now. It is good." As they rode away from the reservation, Brielle sighed with relief. "That went better than I hoped. Thank you for coming with me, Asher." "You didn't need my help," he replied honestly. "You handled everything perfectly. Still, having you there gave me strength." She glanced at him. "The chief saw something in you." "He saw a man with blood on his hands." "No," she corrected gently. "He saw a man who has chosen a different path." She guided her horse closer to his, "As have I." The intensity of her gaze made his heart quicken. "Brielle, I know we haven't spoken of it," she said quietly, "but I think you know how I feel about you." Asher reined his horse to a stop, turning to face her fully. "I'm not a whole man, Brielle. I haven't been for years. I can't offer you what you deserve." "What do you think I deserve?" she challenged. "Someone who can laugh with you, share joy with you." Her eyes softened. "You think you can't give me joy because you don't smile." "Asher, it's not your smile I fell in love with, it's your heart, your courage, your quiet strength." She reached across to touch his hand. "I've seen you with horses, with children, with people in need. You may not smile, but you bring light to others' lives. Love." She had said it, the word hanging between them like a bridge or a chasm, he wasn't sure which. "I've been alone so long," he said finally. "I'm not sure I remember how to be anything else." "You're not alone anymore," she replied simply. "Whether or not you choose to acknowledge what's between us, that fact remains." They rode in silence for several miles, the sun setting behind them, casting long shadows across the plains. Asher's mind churned with conflicting emotions, longing for what she offered and fear of what accepting it might mean. As twilight deepened around them, Brielle suddenly pulled up short, pointing ahead. "Look at that sunset." The western sky was ablaze with color, deep crimson and orange fading to purple at the edges, with the silhouettes of distant mountains creating a dramatic backdrop. It was breathtaking in its intensity and beauty. "I've never seen anything quite like it," she murmured. It's as if the sun is putting on a special performance before saying good night. Asher watched the play of colors across her face, the wonder in her eyes, and felt something shift within him. "You make the sun stay longer," he said softly. She turned to him, surprise evident in her expression. "What? You make the sun stay longer," he repeated, the words coming from some deep place he'd thought long buried. "In my life, in the world, you make everything brighter, Brielle." Tears welled in her eyes. "Asher." Without conscious thought, the muscles in his face remembered their old purpose. Slowly, hesitantly, his lips curved upward, not broadly but genuinely. For the first time in 11 years, Asher Kane smiled. Brielle's breath caught. "Oh," she whispered, reaching out to touch his cheek as if to confirm what she was seeing. "Oh, Asher." He captured her hand, pressing it to his face. "I love you, Brielle. I think I have since the moment you walked into that saloon and didn't let that drunk cowboy intimidate you." She laughed, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I think I fell in love with you when you stood up for me without expecting anything in return, just because it was right." The distance between their horses suddenly seemed too great. Asher dismounted and helped Brielle down, pulling her into his arms the moment her feet touched the ground. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question and an answer in the same moment. The second was deeper, a promise exchanged without words. When they finally parted, Asher rested his forehead against hers. "I don't know what the future holds," he admitted, "but I want to face it with you beside me." "That's all I want too," she assured him, her hands framing his face. "We'll figure out the rest together." They returned to town late that night, delivering the news of the chief's agreement to the sheriff. True to his word, Running Elk ensured the stolen horses were returned the next day, and a delegation of tribal members arrived to begin rebuilding the burned barn. Wilson, initially resistant to the idea of marking sacred sites on his property, eventually agreed after Brielle arranged a meeting between him and the chief. In the weeks that followed, Asher and Brielle became the talk of the town. Their courtship was conducted largely in public church services, community gatherings, and walks along Main Street. Asher's transformation was noted by all. While he still wasn't overly demonstrative, the occasional smile that touched his lips when Brielle was near became a source of quiet wonder. Jenkins formally offered Asher partnership in the livery, which he accepted. "Got to think of the future now," he told Brielle as they walked by the creek where he had first shared his past with her. "And what do you see in that future?" she asked, her hand tucked securely in his. He stopped, turning to face her. From his pocket he withdrew a small ring, a simple gold band with a modest diamond. "You, if you'll have me." Brielle's eyes widened. "Asher, are you asking? Will you marry me, Brielle? Be my wife, my partner, the mother of my children?" The words came easier than he ever imagined they could. "I know I'm still learning how to be the man you deserve, but I promise to try every day." "Yes," she said without hesitation, tears shimmering in her eyes. "Yes, Asher Kane, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then kissed her beneath the cottonwood trees, their leaves golden in the autumn light. They were married on Christmas Day, 1876, in the small church where Brielle taught Sunday school. The townspeople filled the pews, along with several members of Running Elk's tribe who brought gifts and blessings. Mrs. Peterson wept openly, declaring that she'd known all along they were perfect for each other. After a brief honeymoon in St. Louis, the city, not the town, they returned to begin their life together. With his savings and Jenkins' partnership, Asher purchased a small house on the edge of town with enough land for Brielle's garden and a corral for their horses. It wasn't the ranch he'd once dreamed of, but it was theirs, and that made it perfect. Spring arrived with new beginnings. Brielle continued teaching at the schoolhouse, while Asher's reputation as a horse trainer grew. They worked together on improving relations between the town and the reservation, establishing a regular trading day that benefited both communities. One evening in April, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Brielle took Asher's hand and placed it on her stomach. "I have news," she said softly. His eyes widened as understanding dawned. "A baby," she nodded, her smile radiant. "Due in November, the doctor says." Asher pulled her into his arms, his heart so full he thought it might burst. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair. "For everything. For making me whole again." Brielle leaned back to look at him, her hand caressing his cheek. "You were always whole, Asher. You just needed to remember how to live with your heart open." He smiled, a full, unrestrained expression that transformed his face. "You make the sun stay longer," he said again, the words becoming their private affirmation of love. "In every way that matters." As the years passed, their family grew a son born that November whom they named James, after Brielle's father, followed 2 years later by a daughter they called Sarah, honoring Asher's sister. In time, 2 more children joined their family, Michael and Rebecca, filling their home with the laughter and chaos that comes with a loving household. Asher eventually achieved his dream of owning a ranch, buying land outside town, where he raised horses that became known throughout the territory for their quality and temperament. Brielle continued teaching until their 3rd child was born, then devoted herself to their family and to writing educational materials for frontier schools. Their home became a gathering place for the community, a place where settlers and Native Americans could meet in friendship, where children learned to respect differences, and where strangers were welcome. The darkness that had once consumed Asher gradually receded, replaced by a deep contentment he had never imagined possible. On their 20th wedding anniversary, as they watched their children playing in the yard of the home they had built together, Brielle squeezed Asher's hand. "Are you happy, my love?" He looked at her, her honey-colored hair now streaked with silver, laugh lines crinkling the corners of her green eyes, and felt the familiar surge of gratitude that had never diminished over the years. "More than I ever thought possible," he answered truthfully. "You saved me, Brielle. You made me believe in life again." She shook her head, leaning against his shoulder. "We saved each other. That's what love does. It heals, it strengthens, it transforms." Asher nodded, watching as their eldest son taught his younger brother how to rope, while their daughters collected wildflowers in the meadow. The shadows of his past would always be part of him, but they no longer defined him. Instead, he was defined by the love he gave and received, by the family he cherished, by the community he helped build. In the fading light of day, as the sun painted the sky with brilliant colors one more time, Asher Kane, once known as the Cowboy who couldn't smile, wrapped his arm around his wife and grinned broadly at the beauty of their life together. "You make the sun stay longer," he whispered in her ear. "And I'll be grateful for that until my dying day."